Students of Reddit, have you ever lost your temper with a teacher? What's your story? Story 1. I had a Spanish teacher, and in order to gain other students' sympathy, she would make fun of one of the students and kind of bully, but not that bad, but well, you get the idea. Would bully that student for this hour of class. Of course, other students would sometimes laugh because the class was super boring, so it was like a show. I hated that. Of course, she would pick the students that didn't reply back to her provocation, the low profile type. And of course, she would use the perfect excuse just after being mean with, "Ooh, it's just a joke, hee hee." Once, that guy that never searched for trouble for anyone was her victim of the day. She takes him as an example to describe a homeless guy in a picture. After only 10 long minutes, he stands up and leaves the classroom crying. And when she stops him before he leaves, he tells her his dad died the previous night and pushes her away. Once the door closed behind him, she pauses for a second and takes a crying voice to repeat what he had just said. "Ooh, my dad just died. Cry, 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 poor baby." Before I realized it, she received my Spanish book in the face and I called her an ugly slut. Yeah, my insult level isn't great in Spanish. Story 2. In Heidelberg, during my year abroad, my friend and I took a class that we thought would be interesting. It wasn't. The teacher was a complete cow who hated her non-German students, and as we were the only two that semester, well, go figure. She was okay-ish with me after learning I was part German, but awful to my friend. We missed 2 classes overall, had to return to our own university for a little while. This was agreed upon beforehand, so we missed 2 of her classes. Every other time we went to that class was together, so we missed the same amount. However, the woman told my friend she automatically failed her class as she missed 3, but I was fine as I'd only missed 2. We both decided to never go to her class again or sit her exam. Oddly enough, that exam never showed up on our year abroad credits and we both passed with high marks. Story 3. I hadn't been doing well in calculus all year, but I was trying my best and just struggling. My teacher was one of the cool ones, the kind who acts laid back and cracks jokes and all of that. I think this guy just thought I wasn't trying, and he was as frustrated with me as I was with myself. So one day in class, he made a sort of passive-aggressive joke at my expense. Something about if he would just try harder. He didn't even say it in front of other students, just directly to me. But I was so over him thinking I wasn't trying that I got up and walked straight out into the school counselor's office. I would have been sent there anyway for walking out in class, so I decided to expedite the process. She was really kind and talked me down from being so upset. Anyway, that was on a Friday, so I didn't see my calculus teacher again until Monday. I was hoping we could just pretend it didn't happen, but no such luck. He pulled me into the hallway to talk and truly, genuinely apologized. He offered to adjust his office hours, which didn't work for me, to give me extra help. He ended up helping me pass the class, barely, but I still passed. I wouldn't have graduated without it. In retrospect, just talking to him more openly from the get-go probably would have been the more mature thing to do, but I was an awkward, self-doubting teenager who didn't know how to ask for help. In the end, the experience helped me improve that skill and advocate for myself. I still hate calculus, though. Story 4. So we got this admin in my school who we've nicknamed the Pickinator. In my sophomore year, she was patrolling the school freaking Dolores Umbridge style. She loves ruining kids' days, and she busts kids for the most minor of things. This really annoying kid no one likes came up and snatched my backpack and ran. So I ran after him and ripped it out of his hands. Then, of course, the Pickinator comes outside and immediately says, "You two, stop wrestling around and come with me." She escorted us to the office because apparently we were wrestling and fighting. I tried to tell her I was just getting my stuff back, and she wasn't having it. So I just said, "Well, got my stuff back, no reason to stick around now," and went off to my next class, which was starting shortly. I got called down later anyway, but my admin pretty much told me she overreacted and to just forget it happened. The Pickinator hates me now. Story 5. 8th grade science class. God, I hated her. For the sake of this, let's say her name was Mrs. B. Early on in the year, Mrs. B had given us a science fair project due in January. We had several class periods over the course of those months as well to work on it. My project was creating an unbeatable tic-tac-toe program. It did work properly, but that's beside the point right now. Because it would take significantly longer to have 20 people, the number of tests we had to do, each play 3 rounds with the thing, so I asked her if I could do fewer and she agreed. allowing me to only do 7 people, which I got done shortly before Christmas break, only about 1.5 school weeks until the project was due. I make sure to thank her for letting me do fewer, as I would have never gotten it done in time otherwise. She turns to me with this confused look and says something to the effect of, "I never said that. You have to do 20 trials like everyone else." I was so insanely furious, I even got a witness who had overheard her give me a lower number to come in as evidence. Both I and my witness ended up in detention. I did end up getting the project done, but barely, and it was rushed as hell. I still occasionally think of it and want to punch a wall. Story 6. I had a bout of stomach flu, which was so intense that it damaged my intestines, and as a result, my body couldn't process certain foods for a while. This caused me severe pain. I mainly had cramps that were so bad I couldn't do anything useful anymore, except curl up and wait for them to be over. It took me more than a month to figure out a very limited amount of safe stuff to eat, which I ended up slowly expanding on over time. I did miss a few weeks of school when it first started, though. Directly after my math teacher's class, she insisted I come to her and explain why I missed so many of her classes. I had a note from my general practitioner ready, but she dismissed it. She told me she could tell that I wasn't sick, but that I was just lazy and lying to everyone, and that she was severely disappointed in me. I literally just walked away, which is the closest I ever got to having a temper tantrum in class. In retrospect, I wish I had told her what I was really thinking, being that I was very disappointed in her. Story 7. When I was a senior in high school, I had an advanced placement English teacher that would grade people based on how much she liked them, pretty much. I had long hair and stretched earlobes, and she despised me, even though I was an excellent student in all aspects. She claimed I didn't turn in assignments on time to justify my grade, so I spoke with my guidance counselor and she investigated for me. It turns out that she had sorted completed assignments into piles of good and bad and would arbitrarily grade the papers based on how she felt sucked up to her the most that day. I presented a book report on the Odyssey, which was by far the longest and most detailed presentation of the whole class, and she gave me a D. I told her, "Screw you, this is the end of your career," and walked out because I had sent an identical copy to the guidance counselor. She presented it to the school board, which eventually got her fired, and the best part was she was also a driver's ed instructor and lost her job doing that as well. Apparently, I wasn't the first one to speak up about her, but I was the one that put the nail in the coffin, and it felt great. Did we have the same teacher? Because I have a very similar story. The teacher hated me because she was spouting some stuff about how red pistachios don't and never have existed. And me being the pretentious prick I was, I had to prove her wrong, so I bought a whole bag on the internet and dropped them on her desk a few weeks later. She had never liked me, but after that, I couldn't pull a C in her English class. I told my guidance counselor my senior year to put me in remedial English just so I could pass and wouldn't have to take her. Small school, she was the only non-remedial senior English teacher. So they made a separate class with the student's mom being the teacher. She was only qualified to be a sub, technically. And it consisted of me and all the senior boys who wanted to blow off a harder class. You can imagine how well that went. I then went on to graduate with a master's degree in English and a 3.89 GPA, and all the students and other administration of that school. Story 8. A friend of mine wanted to go to a certain university that was out of state and somewhat tough to get into. The counselor told him not to waste his time as he would never get in. This pissed him off, so he went to the principal, who told him to trust the counselor as that was her job. He applied anyways, got accepted, and taped 2 copies to the counselor and principal's door. He couldn't afford to go anyways, but he was trying to prove a point. A true hero. Story 9. I once flipped on my German teacher. I'm German. She obviously didn't like me, and her marks were biased as hell. This one time, she gave me an F on a poetry interpretation. Grading is ridiculous as you can just interpret it as whatever, and the mark depends on the teacher's mood. I always got an A for grammar because the witch has to give me credit where my work is quantifiably good. After handing the papers back out to the students, she did some debriefing about the whole thing, comparing what everyone wrote. She told the whole class how good my thoughts on the poem and some of the passages that I wrote were, and I wanted to read out loud what I wrote. I just said, "You gave me an F," stood up, and left. Story 10. When I was in high school, we had this small, angry teacher that played rugby, or at least tried to, that was always belittling students to feel better about themselves. One day we had physical education, and our teacher couldn't come, so the little and always moody teacher that played rugby came to replace her. The little teacher was trying to show off his skills at rugby and making our class play some game where we had to tackle who had the ball. We didn't tackle hard enough, so the little guy joined to tackle some students and show off his grandness. He was having fun being unstoppable and yelling at us if that was all we could do. I was kind of mad, so I just went running at full speed at him. The little teacher got tackled and hit the ground so hard. That was something our class laughed about all year. Story 11. When I was in high school, a girl absolutely lost her mind on my math teacher. The way class generally went was we'd go in and he'd have the day's assignment written on the board. Then he'd spend the first 20 minutes of class teaching new concepts and going over problems. Then he'd give us about 30 minutes to work on our assignments and he'd sit at his desk and answer questions. Overall, I really liked this style, but some didn't. This girl did not. About 3/4 of the way through the year, she snapped. The class was no different than any other. He explained the new stuff and did some examples and then said, "Anyone who needs individual help just lines up at my desk and I'll be happy to help." She freaking loses it. What do you mean that's it? I don't want to wait in line for 20 minutes. Help me now. This is freaking insane. Screw you. She was getting angrier and angrier, and to my teacher's credit, the angrier she got, the calmer and quieter my teacher got. And the calmer and quieter he was, the more furious she would get. Teacher, calm. I understand you're upset. How about we go to the hallway and talk about it? Student, yelling. No freaking way, help me with this stuff here and now. Teacher, calmer, quieter than before. Now, there's no need for that kind of language. We can discuss this civically. I'm happy to help you in the way I can. Student, even angrier and even louder. Screw you! Screw this! I hate this frickin' school. Teacher, still very calm. I'm sorry you're so frustrated. What can I do? Student, now screaming as loudly as she possibly can. Get screwed, screw this, that, screw everything. This is when the principal walked in and took the girl out of class. The teacher left for a moment to talk to the principal while we could hear this girl screaming all the way to the office, just every expletive in the book, all directed at the teacher. When it was all over, the teacher calmly walked back in, stood at the front, and said, "Well, if anyone else has a problem with me, I'm happy to discuss it if we can be civil." No one said a word. Okay then, anyone who needs help, come see me. The class went on like normal after that. In retrospect, that teacher handled that like a fucking pro in every possible way. Never saw that girl in class or in school again, so something had to have been going on to set her off like that. But I've never seen a student go off like that before or since, and I've worked as a teacher and sub for nearly a decade. Something had to be going on with that girl, but I have no backstory. I don't know if she was struggling with grades or with that class or if that teacher said or did something to set her off. I don't know about it. I just know what I saw in class. I'm certain something was going on with that girl to set her off, though, either at home or at school. I just think that math class was her last straw for whatever reason. Story 12. I had a teacher at private college that enjoyed calling everybody stupid and that we were only studying there because our parents showed how much they earned. There were a lot of scholarship students, myself included, but who cares? I can't be quiet when I hear these kinds of things. She failed most of the class on the first course. We fought with the dean and she let us do another test with another teacher. Everybody passed. In the second course, she gave us the same thing, but this time the dean said we were being dramatic. The teacher decided that there would not be a test, only a group presentation, and she settled the groups. I got stuck with two lazy guys who did nothing. I did the entire paper and the presentation. Both of them got a 9, an A, and I got a 7, a C minus. It was the last time I did the paperwork with the names of the people who did nothing, no matter who they were. I needed a C to pass and failed because of a point. I tried to talk to the dean, but she just wouldn't listen to me, so I had to do the course again. I could do it with another teacher, but I chose her. I was the worst student she had ever had. I sat in the first row, always made a fool of her. Once I made her cry. The next year, she wasn't a teacher there anymore. She made me lose my scholarship because of that grade. I don't regret it, and I'd do it again with an extra bit of cruelty. Story 13. When I was in 8th grade, my science teacher decided the day before the last test of the year to give us an extra 16 pages of new material to learn by ourselves and appear in the test. Needless to say, everyone lost their minds and started complaining. I wrote her an angry letter. I was later forced either to apologize or they would tell my parents. I apologized because I may have been a little inappropriate. And by the end of the year, she was fired after her first year in the school. She also thought it was a good idea to bring her dogs to part of the lessons in the science lab when there are two kids who are allergic to dogs. I had a teacher that thought latex allergies were fake. One day, we did an experiment with balloons, and a kid said she was allergic to latex, and the teacher screamed, "No, you ain't," then started rubbing her violently with the balloon. She got fired that semester. Story 14. I flipped my mind on a logic professor who quote unquote lost my assignments records. "You didn't do them. I am looking at your grades and they are zeros. That's why you have AD. Me. "Look, you idiot. I have papers you've graded right here. They aren't even good, but they are not zeros." It was over the phone, but eventually I read through his comments on my papers while he was trying to argue with me. That's when he's like, "Okay, that doesn't sound made up. Scan your papers and email them in." Went from a D to a B. Story 15. There was a high school English teacher, Miss Blades, who was ignoring me for a while. It's worth mentioning that she didn't really like me for some reason. I wasn't a bad or annoying kid. In fact, I was very non-confrontational and mostly kept to myself in and out of class, so I don't know what that was about. Anyway, I had my hand up because I had to use the bathroom, and she kept pacing about the room, answering other kids' questions, but would glance at me and immediately look away. After about 5 minutes with my hand up and getting ignored and about to poop my pants, I whistled as loud as I could. Interrupting anyone was completely out of character for me. Well, once upon a time, I had a chipped tooth on one of my front teeth, so I could whistle extremely loud because of it. My whistle was just that. It was a whistling equivalent of firing a gun in a closed room. Absolutely deafening. The entire room got quiet, and she snapped her head around so fast. As her name might suggest, Miss Blades was staring daggers into my face. Then one kid goes, "Ooh, he just called you a dog. Ooh." Then she gained serious momentum from that one off and said, "Oh, I don't think so. You think I'm a dog? You think I'm a dog?" I got sent to the principal's office for disrespecting an ignorant teacher. I used the bathroom on the way there. Story 16. I know a chap who once lost it in a lesson and threw a chair at the teacher. Some years, like 15 or so back, and the two are now pretty good friends. Essentially, a discussion had turned into an argument, holding up the rest of the lesson, with the chap basically being awkward and pedantic, not letting it go, getting unduly steamed up himself, and apparently not realizing that everyone was getting pretty tired. The teacher made some snide remark, and the chap flipped, threw a chair, and walked out. He waited outside, though, cooling off, and afterward the teacher went outside as well, saying something to the effect of, "I think we both ought to apologize for what just happened," and so they did, and all was well. Story 17. I was the section leader in the marching band. I was a junior, and my section was 6 freshmen. We were having trouble getting a formation. These kids had never marched before, and I kept taking to help them keep track. The director was a huge about it, though, making the entire band redo it because I was taking it. He called me out, and I argued back. I told him I was doing my job as section leader, trying to make sure that my section was in line because it was tricky. He flipped his mind. I flipped my mind back, and it ended with him telling me to just go home in the middle of the day. So I went to the office and told my guidance counselor what was happening and that I wanted to drop marching band. He got in a lot of trouble, specifically for telling me to leave campus. It turned into a whole thing. My parents and I came in for a meeting with him and the vice principal. In the end, the dude almost got fired and had to go to a seminar on how to communicate better. The other band director, who taught non-marching bands, talked me into staying in the marching band. Story 18. The English department at my first college was staffed by people who, by and large, were idiots. Their idea of a writing workshop was having you email the assignment to the teacher and then making you pay at least $10 to print out enough copies of your story for the entire class. Why we couldn't just put it up on a message board somewhere, they were built into our school's online infrastructure, I don't freaking know. The teacher of this workshop also made it abundantly clear that he didn't give a flying freak about his students. I'm pretty sure he was a grad student teaching the class for credit, but he acted like a major douche and pretty clearly didn't read any of the stories beyond a basic skimming. We took quizzes on computers and he didn't give a hell if we Googled the answers as long as we got it done before class ended. He drove one of his students to a panic attack on the last day because he had acted like such a creep to them, micromanaging one of their stories. It was bizarre. They also had this weird thing where they would gather every English major in the college into the chapel on campus every Thursday in order to have you listen to someone read from their work. It was advertised as creative writing common time, but it literally just meant sit down, shut up, listen to someone read their works that were rejected from a lit magazine. No laptops, no phones, no books, and if you missed one session of this out of an entire semester, you failed the class. And you had to take 4 semesters of this if you wanted to pass. By the end of the first semester, I've had enough. I'd missed a session, and the makeup assignment was just as bizarre. You had to find an audio recording of a work online, read it by the author, and analyze how they read it. Like, what? It really got bad on the last day, too. Undergrad students were finally allowed to read, and either they didn't vet them at all or they vetted them really poorly because there was a student who read a graphic depiction of rape and murder, and the teachers just let him. A few of the other students in the building left in disgust. I almost joined them. Needless to say, I dropped out of the English program at this college and transferred to a university whose English department isn't staffed by psychopaths. Took me an extra year to graduate. I don't care. I was better than that. Story 19. I flipped on several teachers, but this one still bugs me. One of my best friends in high school had died in a car accident, and a couple of days later, my friends and I told my teacher we would not be able to make it to class because of the viewing. She then proceeded to tell us that we need to plan our days better and how irresponsible it was of us. I never felt so much rage. Screw you, Mrs. Weaver. Story 20. A couple of weeks into my senior year of high school, the president gave a speech about the importance of school or something. I don't know. I wasn't really paying attention. Anyway, all of the teachers in my school had to set up their projectors so we could watch it. My math teacher couldn't figure out how to get her projector working, so me being the nerdy kid, I offered to help. She had a fit, started screaming about how she wasn't stupid and how I needed to just sit down and shut up. After a few more minutes of her failing to fix it, she pointed at me and ordered me to fix it. I said, "Fix it yourself." She told the whole class to go next door to watch the speech in that teacher's room. When we got up to leave, she pulled me to the side and told me that when the class got back, I was going to stand up and apologize for being so rude to her. I refused and went to join the rest of the class. She spent the rest of the year making my life miserable. She told me on several occasions that she was going to make sure that I failed her class. Sure enough, I failed her class, the only class I ever failed. My parents went to the administrators, but they didn't want to do anything and said it was an issue for the math department head. The department head was a good friend of my teacher and took her side. The class wasn't a requirement for graduation, and it was the last semester before I was done with high school, so I didn't care to waste any more time on it. I would turn in homework assignments and she wouldn't get them. Students weren't allowed to keep a copy of the tests because the school was worried about test compromises, so she could basically give me whatever she wanted on them, and I couldn't prove anything. If there was a dispute about the test grades, the school's policy was to have the department head regrade the test. But as I mentioned, the department head was a friend of hers and found that all of the tests that I disputed were graded correctly. Whether or not that was true, I don't know since I never got to see them. Students of Reddit, what's something your teacher did that really pissed off the whole class? Story 1. I had one of those teachers that just put a bunch of activities on the board and browsed something on their laptops all lesson. The worst part was it was a math teacher. The only thing she'd do was maybe tell us to shut up once or twice, apart from one time. Possibly after one of us had had a word with someone about how little she did, she suddenly snapped and sent the entire class outside until we were ready to do work. We all just laughed our asses off and browsed our phones. The ones who actually cared about algebra went back in until the teacher decided to come and check on us. She just stood there. We were all completely silent until I decided to break the silence. Nice of you to join us. Oh boy. Basically, after that, we compiled a doc of what she'd been doing so we could have a talk with the dean or something about what had been going on, but not before someone accidentally shared it with the teacher. And so for the last term she was with us, she actually improved. So yeah, that's my story. Story 2. Not a teacher, but the administration had all of us in middle school wear student IDs on a lanyard color-coded by what hallway our classes were in every single day. This sparked massive actual protests from the students, because even though my town is pretty low on crime rates, that administration, middle school and above, essentially treated every kid like they were either already a criminal or had strong potential to be. There were so many protests on the lanyard crap they stooped to doing it after winter break because it'd be bad publicity if they kept giving out detentions for insubordination the way they were. They also did things like assign seating at lunch and force the middle schoolers who wanted to go see the high school football games to be fenced in so as not to cause trouble. Note, wow, if there were no words like school and teacher here, this would actually feel like you're describing a jail. Story 3. Math teacher, General Certificate of Secondary Education year. The teacher gave us a piece of coursework that we had about a month to do. We weren't the brightest bunnies at math in that particular class, just under average. But somehow every single student in that class decided we were going to go above and beyond to try and up our grades. We collectively pulled together and worked our ass off, some of us going without sleep at times so we could work on it and provide help to the others, myself included. When we handed in our coursework, there was a pretty good feeling in the class. We thought we had done well, and we were pleased with ourselves. When we got our papers back, we all got higher grades than usual, and in many cases did even better than we had hoped, myself included. Then the teacher informed us that the coursework was only mock and didn't count for anything. We now had to do the real coursework in the span of 2 weeks. There wasn't a riot. Everyone just went quiet. We were collectively stunned in disbelief, and no one said anything at all. We just simply couldn't believe it. Over the next 2 weeks, I was pretty much crying every night. I'd burned myself out over the mock and was just too tired. I'd also been recently diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, which didn't help my concentration or my mood at all. I wasn't the only one either. Everyone else was having issues, and all the camaraderie we had built over the month previous just dissolved. Handed in my coursework after the fortnight was up, and then we went and cried in the girls' toilets because I knew it was awful, especially compared to the mock I had been so proud of. The results from that were nearly all below our usual grades. I just about scraped my old average. The teacher then rubbed salt in the wound by saying she was disappointed in all of us. Just no one had the energy to argue. We just took it. I think one person tried complaining to the head teacher afterward, but nothing came of it. For extra injury, that teacher had several math classes, but we were the only ones she pulled that stunt on. Story 4. In the second semester of my first year of law school, everyone in my class, about 80-plus people, had to take a research class. This class was taught by 4 different law librarians, but followed the same syllabus. It was also worth 1 credit. These librarians ran the class as if it was 3 credits. We had to read, conduct legal research, and write 2 memos throughout the semester when we had 5 other classes, all within the 2 to 4 credit range, plus 1 specific class was notoriously difficult. Anyway, halfway through the semester, my class gets pissed at the workload to credit ratio, and someone starts a petition to reduce the number of assignments and/or change the grading for the class from a letter grade to pass-fail. Almost the entire class signs. There were a few holdouts. The student who started the petition delivers it to the librarians. The librarians remove 1 or 2 assignments but otherwise disregard the petition. Those who signed all awkwardly suffered through the rest of the semester. It's so annoying to get only 1 credit for a big class. Once a teacher said about a 1-credit class, quote, "Actually, this class should have more credits, but there just weren't any left when dividing the credits." It also happens that classes are 0 credits and you're still supposed to schedule to pass them. It's weird how the credits are divided. A study year is worth 60 credits, then the credits are just divided somehow over all the classes, no matter how many classes and how much workload there is. The weirdest thing that happened was when my major shared a common subject with a different major. We had different but overlapping majors, and this was one of the overlapping subjects. Because the other major had fewer subjects in total, this subject was worth more credits to them than to my major, because we all had to get 60 credits in a year, no matter the number of subjects and the workload. Story 5. The class was doing a project on criminal justice and held a mock trial. My friend got assigned to play the role of a sexual assault victim. In real life, she had actually been a victim of an assault that was very similar to that of the character. She felt that it would be too emotionally draining and tried to get out of the part. The teacher wanted an explanation, but my friend kept saying it was very personal. This went back and forth a few times over the next 2 days, and it was just not clicking in the teacher's head. Finally, he lost his patience and yelled out, "You're holding up this whole project for everyone. Why the hell is this so difficult for you?" With the whole class paying attention, she admitted she had been sexually assaulted the same way this character had and went to go cry. They changed the topic of the project after that, but the class never really looked at the teacher the same way again. Story 6. My German teacher would make you retake spelling tests until you got 100%. Once you did, you could sit and do whatever you like until the whole class got 100%. Now, this caused a lot of pressure on everyone as he used to belittle the students who didn't pass first or the second time. If you were the only one left, he would stand over you and watch you struggle. One test day, I decided to bunk off and I got caught. I burst into tears and explained how horrible this teacher was and that I'm never going back into his class. I was moved into a higher set German class with an amazing teacher and my German actually improved. Story 7. This was second year, maybe around 12th grade in school. My teacher, unable to manage 20 of these rowdy kids, is pretty enraged by the end of the class. She has a thing about counting every piece of equipment after class and she begins counting the Newton meters. Now, if you don't know what these are, they're literally metal springs with plastic around them that measure how much an item weighs. This teacher counted 19 when there were definitely 20. So she holds us back from lunch. She brings the faculty head in and we get a bollocking from her. Cannot steal from the school, unjust, yada 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 yada. If we were rowdy before, we're raging now, and she requests the least well-behaved kids open their bags. Of course, these kids are protesting, but the teacher offers detention if they don't comply. So after rummaging through a bunch of pubescent kids' bags and finding nothing, she finally goes back to her desk to find the Newton meter sitting behind her world's best teacher mug. Look on her face? Priceless. Story 8. I'm super glad I get to tell this story. In high school, I had a teacher for pre-calculus who we'll call Dr. B. She was the worst experience I'd ever had with an educator, bar none. To this day, I still hate having taken that class. As a sophomore, I had never actually had a teacher who was credentialed to the point of having a doctorate. The only doctors I really knew about were medical doctors. So when I started this class, I often called her Miss B instead of Dr. B. Every time I used the wrong title when trying to speak with her caused her to ignore me completely. And not just me, but any student who did the same. As you can imagine, most kids had this problem initially. This led to an increasingly frustrating classroom environment to the point where no one liked her and only spoke if they absolutely had to. I tried to get better at using the proper title, but I would occasionally make a mistake. Everyone hated dealing with her, and some kids would do it on purpose just to annoy her. One day, I had to use a restroom, and I raised my hand to get her attention. She didn't see me at first, so I called her name. Miss B, can I use the restroom? This witch looked me dead in the eye and then turned back to what she was doing, completely ignoring me. I was so goddamn angry, I walked out and went to the restroom anyway. When I came back, she tried to write me up for leaving class. I just took the referral and tore it up, looking her dead in the eye. We had a bit of a standoff, you might say. A couple of my buddies were fighting to keep from laughing because I was never the rebellious type, so this was a treat for them. She let it go, so I figured that was that. When I got home, my mother asked me what happened. Turns out she called my mom about my discipline problem and said that we would have to accept a referral the following day. I told my mom what happened, and thankfully she understood. Most of my teachers loved me, and I never had any problems, so this was not a normal situation. She said she'd take care of it. The next day, I get called down to the office after first period. When I arrive, my mom is there with Dr. B, the principal, and a couple of other administrators. She then proceeds to go into this crazy mom mode and basically tells them that any referrals written by this teacher would be ignored and she would not force me into any kind of in-school or out-of-school detentions. It was one of my favorite mom moments, and all I could think was, hell yeah! Things got a little better in class after that, but I still hated her and was happy when the year was over. Story 9. Screamed at the class because he assumed that an intermittent beeping sound that occurred throughout the lecture was somebody receiving text. It was a projector that he was using, alerting him to the fact that it was overheating. Dumbass. That's almost as good as a time a substitute tried to confiscate a student's phone when it beeped. It was a diabetes thing attached to the student's body. My other friend with an insulin pump tells people that she is bionic and that her batteries are low whenever someone questions the fact that she is beeping. The fuel she uses to recharge is usually a juice box. Story 10. She didn't believe in field trips because she said that kids would have too much fun and learning isn't supposed to be fun. However, the entire grade would take the trip, so she was required to take us. So she would make us all sit in a common area, the zoo, museum, etc., and she would hold classroom lessons. It was so upsetting to hear about all the cool things the other kids got to see while we had class. The fact that I still remember things I learned on fun field trips compared to the countless times I was in a classroom says a lot. Story 11. Numerous times they failed students at an exam, then publicly admitted that passing 40 to 50% of students that took the exam would be too much, and that's considered normal behavior. I absolutely hate this. There was a teacher at my old university who just so happened to be the father of one of my closest friends. I was very confused in the beginning when everyone hated him because to me, he seemed like a nice guy. I found out later he takes pride in failing his students and will actively fail anyone he feels isn't interested or putting in enough effort. One of my favorite professors said it best. If half of your students fail your class, you have failed as an educator for half of those students. Story 12. a 40-degree weather Celsius in outback Australia, and she would not turn on the aircon in class even though it worked. Her reason was that when she was young, she didn't have an aircon and she survived. All the students hated her. Story 13. Oh, this one's a favorite. Post-English class, break starts, and I remain at my desk and do the homework the teacher assigned. The break ends and the teacher comes back and sees I've done the homework already. She waits for the class to come back, then she shouts, "Since she has already done the homework, you all get 2 extra pages." Needless to say, that didn't improve my bullying situation. It was a middle school in Italy. I was 12 at the time, and it definitely was not a lot of homework. Don't remember how much, but probably around 5 pages of English grammar exercises. Fill in the gaps, turn adjectives into adverbs, etc. It was easy homework. Most pupils who liked the subject would be able to do it in a 15-minute break. But teachers and pupils bullied me terribly in that school. I do remember my parents telling me she was probably bitter because I could speak and understand English better than her. Which could have been the case, could have been not, I don't remember, but she surely didn't like me. Yelled at me for no reason, called me stupid, laughed when other kids bullied me, or actually got mad at me when I got bullied. It means you did something to piss them off. It's safe to say that this wasn't an actual thought through a pedagogic decision gone wrong. Story 14. The head teacher of my high school tried to expel me for having an epileptic seizure in front of him, said I was a danger and distraction to other pupils and was disrupting his school. I ended up being kept out of school for 2 months while my parents fought my case. At that time, almost all the rest of the teaching staff, who were furious with this decision, kept me supplied with work and even one-on-one mentoring when needed. This was in a rural area where the next nearest school was about 40 miles away, so we had no other school choice. Story 15. At university, my professor did not tell us the time of our examination, despite numerous emails from 20-odd students, as well as the head professor of the course. This exam could have been any time from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., and I lived 90 minutes from campus and relied on crap public transport to get into university. I got to go 9 p.m. the day before the exam, and no one knew when the exam would be, and if we missed it, we would fail the whole module. So I took the train to the city where my university is and booked a cheap, crappy hotel room for the night just to make sure I was there on time. We all took the exam at 12 p.m. after getting an email an hour before the exam was being held, so I wouldn't have made it in time if I stayed at home. The worst part was that no one cared, not the professor, the course lead, or the head of our school. They all just left 30 students in the lurch, allowing them to potentially fail the exam and therefore the module. Story 16. On the last day of school, it is customary, at least in Germany, that you don't do anything and just watch a movie or go to town and eat ice cream. We are a school where you have class from 8 to 16, and we're the state that has summer vacation last. So in the last lesson where we did freaking math, which no one likes, he told us at the end, how does it feel to be the last students doing lessons in the whole of Germany? Story 17. We were about 10 or 11 years old. It was the last period of the day and the music teacher was subbing for our science class. He was sitting at the computer and we were all getting on with our work. Towards the end of the period, our homeroom teacher comes into the classroom and exclaims, "It's the end of the day. Why are you all not packed up?" To which the music teacher replied, "I told them and they refused to." Excuse you? He hadn't said a thing to us, so we all protested. Even so, our homeroom teacher told us off for being disobedient as a music teacher slithered out of the room and we had to stay 10 minutes late as punishment. Lying snake. Story 18. I had a college professor who was teaching history course to a bunch of education majors in their junior year. She would ask us questions all the time about things she hadn't yet lectured on and then pull the, "Really? Does no one know the answer to this? Well, I guess we'll just wait for someone to answer." We were all education majors. We knew that trick. We waited her out every single time. She always broke first. This was a poorly executed attempt at using the Socratic method. It's better to have students arrive at an answer themselves than it is to tell them. However, you have to first create an environment of trust and respect so that students are comfortable enough to risk a wrong answer, and you have to be willing to provide a little bit of scaffolding should no one know. This professor did neither of those things. Story 19. Pretty standard teacher stuff, keeping the whole class in at lunch for something one person had done. It was the fact that the school had very clear behavior punishment policies that teachers and pupils alike understood that pissed us off, because she blatantly broke them just to prove a point. Someone's phone went off in class. At that school, at that time, that meant having your phone taken off of you and getting it back at the end of the day. Fair dues. The someone whose phone it was, however, refused to admit it was them, and this pissed the whole class off to begin with. Then the teacher said that we'd all have to come back at lunch. The lesson was after the break, so we had another lesson before lunch, And if we didn't, we'd have an hour's detention after school. Being a goody-goody, I didn't want an hour's detention on my record, so I turned up but did at least start eating my packed lunch and dared her to tell me not to. I'd like to know if she ever chased up the people who didn't turn up. Story 20. In GCSE English, he taught us the wrong novel for almost the entire term. So we'd read this book over and over, answered essays, and remembered and studied every significant narrative meaning. Apparently, none of the faculty heads had checked up on him until about 6 weeks before our exams when they realized all of our work was on a book not even on the syllabus, and all of our time was effectively wasted. So to rectify it, we lost all of our PE lessons, had to stay late after school 3 days a week, and spend 3 out of 5 lunch breaks cram learning the actual book with another teacher. Safe to say our class wasn't happy at all, and most parents complained as it could affect our ability to pass the exams. Story 21. Make everyone come to college from 10 to 11:30 to hold presentations, be 45 minutes late, not tell students they aren't allowed to see each other's student presentations and thus make them be at school at 10 without reason, somehow take up to 3 times the amount of allocated time per presentation group, finish at 6 o'clock instead of 11:30, let most of the students fail or just barely passed, in that particular order. Story 22. My work sent me on a 3-day advanced Adobe Illustrator course last April in London. Just before the exam, the tutor said, "Oh, by the way, there may be a few questions on this exam that we haven't talked about. Just do your best." What the actual hell? My work has just paid about £1,000 for this, and his response was that he can't be expected to teach everything. There were about 6 students in the class, and we were all pretty pissed. Story 23. The first day as a new teacher in our school, she came from a private school originally, asked the class what hyperbole was, and we were all silent as we hadn't heard the term before. She rudely goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought I was teaching a top-set English class." Everyone in the class unanimously agrees after the teacher leaves to go get photocopies to make that teacher's life a living hell. Some students piped up and said she was just as rude as that when talking to her tutor group. Cue the next few weeks of being angels with our original teacher and being the worst class ever with the rude one, plus complaining about the rude teacher to our original one and getting our parents to send in complaints about the rude one. We had her fired by Christmas. Story 24. Various teachers said that gay sex is equivalent to eating dirt, being gay is a choice, people with specific disabilities shouldn't have sex if they can't procreate, if you're born with an extra appendage, that extra appendage is evil, dogs don't have feelings. Yeah, I went to a Catholic school. Even the students that were Catholic thought those statements were pretty outrageous. Story 25. She yelled at my friend for missing so much class. He was obviously in chemo, he looked like it, and the whole school knew, including faculty, and he said, "I have cancer," and walked out. He died 3 months later of leukemia.
What was the dumbest assignment you were given in school? Story 1. In my 8th grade English class, we had a South African teacher who wanted to teach art instead. We read maybe 2 books over the entire year, but we made about 15 paintings related to the book we read on our own. Right before winter break, she told us that we would each be writing a 50-page fiction book over the next month and a half, including the break. We had to make a proposal and a summary of our story and present it to the class for a grade. Barely anyone worked on their book over the break, which pissed the teacher off. I started writing my book 10 days before it was due, and at one point I wrote 20 pages in a day, but usually just did 4 to 6 pages per day. Naturally, my book was flailing nonsense, mostly lifted up from Magic the Gathering lore. And it kinda just ended at a certain point, but I spent a shitload of time working on it, so whatever. The assignment was brutal for an 8th grader, especially coupled with other homework, so I was just happy with writing the full 50 pages. When we turned our books in, one of my friends told me that he only wrote 20 pages of actual content and the rest were random words strung together. And another friend only wrote 25 pages. I was pretty proud of myself for legitimately trying. Then our teacher had us sell our books to her by wearing dress clothes and pitching our stories to her. We received 3 grades for that, and she didn't even have to grade us on the actual books or even read them. My friend who the assignments made the same grades as me. I could have given her 50 pages of Greeking and gotten the same grade. It was the most fruitless thing I've ever done. And she didn't even give us our books back, no matter how many times our parents asked. It was without a doubt the worst assignment I've ever done, and nothing else has come close. Story 2. The teacher from my AP Government class used to make us grade the tests and papers from his other classes because we were smart enough to learn the material on our own. We never really complained about it because grading tests is more fun than doing actual work. But in the end, it kinda sucked because most of us did really badly in the AP exams. There are 3 branches of government, and by the time the AP exams rolled around, we had only gone over 2 in class. Story 3. In high school, we had to write a letter about a rule or policy that we didn't like and address it to someone in a high position at a company or in the government or whatever. Everyone thought it was just an exercise, so most of us just wrote a letter to the principal about a stupid rule that we didn't like. Turns out the teacher sent every letter without telling us. One at a time, we were called into the principal's office, and about 3/4 of the class got detentions for it. That's such bullshit. Story 4. We once had a crossword in chemistry. Crosswords are stupid assignments anyway, but this one took the cake. Instead of clues to figure out and write in the blanks, the clues were the words. The assignment was literally to copy the words into the blanks. The teacher used some old Windows 95 program to make them. The program could make either crosswords or word searches. I'm pretty sure she meant to make a word search and made a crossword by accident, but you'd think she would have realized it at some point. Story 5. I had an English teacher in high school. It was his first year teaching there, and he was not well liked for some of his policies regarding the class. He knew this, and towards the end of the year, maybe 3/4 in, gave us a choice of 2 assignments: a very long essay about the characters in some book we were reading, or a 1-page letter addressing why we don't like him and what he could do to change. Turns out, only myself and 3 other kids in the class did a letter. How do I know it was only 3 other kids? Because he reported us all to the principal, and we were called in one day to get a lecture about how disrespectful we had been to the teacher, and we all got in-school suspensions. Story 6. My biology teacher during my senior year wanted us to collect all these plant samples in winter on the west coast of Canada. Yeah, about 75% of the plants she assigned us weren't blooming at all at this time of year. To be fair, she was from South Africa, but honestly, maybe just research the area before assigning a project like that. It's impossible to find dandelions and maple leaves when it's fricking January. Story 7. In community college, our sociology professor wanted us to go into Little Tokyo in downtown LA and ask World War II related questions to anyone who looked Japanese. I decided to drop that class and get a W instead. Story 8. I went to college in Illinois. The very first assignment in English 101-145 was write an essay about what it's like to be in a cornfield to someone who's never been in one. I had to raise my hand and be like, I'm from New Jersey. Everyone was flabbergasted that there could be a person who had never been in a cornfield. Story 9. Not me, but my brother. I know, but it's a story that needs to be shared. He's in a 200-level film course, winter term, and in late January, the professor gives out a list of movies that will be valid subjects for the midterm, and that the students should choose a movie they do not know well, and if there are none on the list they know, they have nearly a month to watch some off the list and then rewatch the one they'd like to do for the project. The teacher mentions that the project can be done in multiple formats to fit the creative needs of all students, so that they can best express what they feel is most important in the film without being confined to the middle school essay format. My brother notices that The Iron Giant, one of the greatest movies of all time, I'm sure we can all agree, is on the list and watches the movie right away when he gets home and asks if I want to do the project with him in podcast form, which had been okayed by the professor. Now, the rubric for the assignment hadn't been sent out yet, but wanting to do well in the course and wanting to do one of his favorite films justice, my brother watches the film about 3 times and takes all sorts of notes and reads a lot of articles about it while I do similar, though I only watched it once and read a handful of articles since this was his project and I would mostly be a springboard for the points he would be making. And we both make sure to take notes on a wide variety of things about the movie, such as the animation, camera work, voice acting, setting, illusions, theme, etc. Since, again, the project itself is a mystery to us both at this point, but it's worth 20% of his final grade, so we assume that it'll be something of a doozy, like writing up the kind of in-depth monster-sized piece that the film crit Hulk nails out. So then my brother calls me over Skype and we give a trial run of the podcast. talking about points we took away from the film, what might be the most interesting to focus on if the midterm provides some leeway for that if we can tie it back to a certain role in the history of films, importance to all ages and adult animation, the rise of Pixar and the rise of superhero movies, etc., and talk about the movie for nearly 2 hours until he gets an email from his film professor which includes the grading rubric for the assignment. I wish I had saved the audio from that Skype session so you could hear what disappointment sounded like. Midterm assignment. Create a top 10 list including your 10 favorite fun facts about the movie you chose. A BuzzFeed/WatchMojo top 10 list as the midterm worth 20% of the final grade in a 200-level course. Realizing that he was asked to subject one of his favorite movies to this bullshit tripe after all the work that he had gone into film analysis and criticism and how ready he was to take the project in a cool audio format, he ended the Skype call and apologized for involving me in the project. This is a project that any student could have shed out in 4 minutes under the teacher's rubric, and it contained no critical thinking or film analysis whatsoever. Just reading the IMDb and Wikipedia article of a given movie and adding in some purple prose to make it not read like something submitted by an accountant. I feel his disappointment. I voted for BuzzFeed hate. Story 10. Went to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and read a paper on the experience. It felt like such an invasion of privacy. We were told not to tell anyone at the meeting why we were there. Shortly after I attended the meeting, our professors pulled the assignment. Some of the students were questioned at a meeting about why they were there, and some complaints were made to our professors. Story 11. On an exam at university, we had to make a PowerPoint presentation, but not with a computer or anything. No, that would be too reasonable. Instead, we had to draw a bunch of boxes on white paper and fill them in with pictures, words, and whatnot. Coloring was expected. This was in a third-year engineering course. Story 12. It's not that bad of an assignment, but it was just funny. We had to create a movie cast for a book that we were reading and explain why we cast the actors in each role. We created Tyler Perry's The Scarlet Letter, and just put Tyler Perry in every part. I'm fairly sure we got a good grade. That would make a terrifying film. Story 13. In gym class, we had a fitness contest. The teacher must have goofed up because 10 sit-ups were 1 point and each bench hop was 10. Standing on one side of the bench with both hands on it and hop over it. Sit-ups were first, so I did 10 and stopped. I looked at the others powering out 60 to 70. Then came the bench hop, and they were all cramped from the sit-ups, and I powered out about 100. Story 14. Once in high school, we had to pick a classmate and write a poem about them. We'd then have to read it out loud and have everyone guess who it was about. I had social anxiety and no friends in the class. I wrote the poem about myself. Loophole unlocked! Story 15. As part of the Ancient Egyptian History unit in our middle school, we made papyrus by soaking paper in water, blending the pulp with food coloring, and then spreading the pulp to dry. Not so bad for arts and crafts, but since this was a private school, we also had to pick a Bible verse and write on the papyrus using calligraphy. Story 16. I went to a vocational/tech school in high school for aviation. One of my assignments was to trace the terminal area chart for Long Island, where I live, which also included the Kennedy/LaGuardia plus Newark cluster of Class B airspace. All of the obstructions in the New York City area, and much, much more. My teacher told us it would help us memorize our local area and airspace limits, radio frequencies, etc. I couldn't tell you most of the information on this chart to save my life. Took me the better part of 50 work hours, and even though I handed it in basically 3 years ago exactly, I have had RSI, repetitive strain injury, issues with my right hand since. Story 17. Lived in Okinawa and went to a DODDS, Department of Defense Dependent School. High school for American military children. A 9th grade science teacher broke her hip and was shipped to Hawaii, and they replaced her with a PE certified instructor. She had no idea what she was doing. 95% of the students refused to do their work since they could just use the excuse of the teacher switching and them being like, oh, so confused by the switch in styles. Come the end of the year, and she had to offer extra credit to raise their grades. The assignment? Give a presentation on some parts of the human body and you get a free 100 points added to your grade. I'm sitting pretty with my 97, so f*** the report/presentation. The kids who did do it did terribly. Half-assed projects with incorrect info. The teacher still added 100 to their overall grade. 117%, 133%? That's f***ing awesome, but a shame that you didn't do it. You could have had 197%. Story 18. In high school, I had a permanent substitute for our geometry class. It was evident that she had no clue how to teach geometry or even do math. This was one of the bogus assignments. Write 5 math quotes from Stand and Deliver. She was such a bad teacher that she influenced me to become a math teacher. 7 years later, I am having students take interest in scientific and mathematical discussions and learning in a very high-need area. I couldn't be any happier. Story 19. In my first year of university, we took a test worth 25% of our grade that was so filled with errors that it was borderline incomprehensible. Multiple choice questions with answer options from a different question, true or false questions like, how long ago approximately did we separate from chimpanzees? There were 90 students in an exam hall writing this test, and the supervisors did their best. It ended up being a bell-curved 23% upwards because the average grade was 45. For the chimpanzee question, did you ever find out if the correct answer was true or false? Story 20. Having to read a book called Coal for my high school world geography class for summer reading. It was literally about the history of coal, and we had to write a report on every frickin' chapter. I used to love reading. I swear the god-awful books my school assigned us made me hate it. After we turned in our assignments on the first day of school, we never talked about coal again. Also, I live/grew up in Texas, and if you're gonna make us read about a natural resource, you'd think you'd choose oil. I read the book for fun, and it was awful even then. The book itself is 1/3 history of coal and 2/3 how bad it is. Story 21. In my high school, we were studying the Russian Revolution. Our assignment was to write a transcript of like a BBC radio interview with a Bolshevik leader. The time period of the revolution was before BBC radio. Hell, personal radio for entertainment wasn't even a thing at the time. This is in history class. But I realized I can have fun with this, so I do it in the style of that sort of modern radio interview. The interview warns the communists that this is an interview and not a platform for his propaganda. Of course, the commie keeps bursting out all the propaganda, all those Bolshevik phrases and keywords that I had learned in class and markers usually liked so much. Eventually, the interviewer is fed up and calls for security to throw the commie out and the interview ends. It was funny, and I had worked rather hard on it. Out of the 4-tier grading system, excellent, merit, achieved, not achieved, the teacher, who was kind of a cunt and didn't like me very much, only gave me merit, like a B, giving the vague, oh, you were so close, buddy, it's not quite there yet answer as to why I didn't get excellence. So yeah, the premise of the assignment was dumb, and so was my grade for it. Story 22. It was an art project. The teacher didn't get the scope and nobody realized it either. It was a beaded portrait. We each got a 45 by 45 wood sheet. We had to glue beads on it to make a picture. The whole board had to be covered. The problem was that we were using these micro beads. These beads are 1 by 2 millimeters wide. We were given a week to complete the project and the beads could not be random. They all had to point in one direction. Running a few numbers in my head, this was borderline impossible unless we spent all our time doing it. Most people came up with these crazy elaborate patterns, portraits, landscapes, animals, etc. I figured completion is the key. I made a simple stripe pattern, each stripe with one color, and most people got a toothpick or a pen, put a bead on it, and dipped it in glue and put it into place. Run the math, it is impossible to finish in time with that way. I did my trick. Dump a load of glue on an area, pour beads on them, and then use a mechanical pencil to push them around and align them. Art was always my lowest grade ever, but using my way, I was the only one able to pass on time. The next person was a week later, and he was also a slacker who didn't care and just dumped beads onto the glue and was flattening them so they would all point whichever way. The good artists in the class passed weeks late. One was a month late. Due to a grave incurred subjectivity of the art and being the only person in on time, I got 100% with my stripes. The next highest grade was 80%. A landscape done in beads. Looked like something people would buy in a store. It didn't make much sense. It was an art class, but easily the ugliest piece got the best mark for being on time. And the nicest piece isn't, because doing something nice took some time. The teacher never did that medium again. Story 23. Once in high school science, I had to make a film ad for traveling to another planet in our solar system. I chose Mars just cuz and began writing the script. However, the issue was that there were only so many facts about Mars I could put into a 2-minute film without the ad beginning to sound like a Martian propaganda film. So eventually, my sister, a film uni student, began to help me regardless of the consequences, and we began to fill 1.5 minutes of the ad with nonsensical aliens, advertising things to do at a Mars hotel, information about old grandpas skiing down Mars's sand dunes, and information about past experiences of little children experiencing with using the low-gravity toilets, all with photoshopped stock footage as a visual aid. By the end, we had developed my own mythos for the timeline where this ad existed, and I and my sister were in hysterics after spending weeks on this project that seemed to include everything that had been asked for, while also being our bloody magnum opus of humor at the time. So I handed it in, unsure if it would pass with flying colors or just fail miserably and be forced to redo the project. I never heard anything from the teacher about my grades from the project again. Whenever my class asked, he just said he was still marking it and needed more time. But every so often, he'd give the marks of 1 or 2 of the students out for them to see, which, as luck would have it, would never be mine. Eventually, he swapped teaching our class for another one, as it was quite normal halfway through the year at my school, and I never got the results from that assignment ever again. The results for the entire class were never published even at the end of the year report, and never impacted our grades for the class. Story 24. We had to take a very biased survey for the school paper. It was regarding racism in America. Here are some questions I found interesting. First of all, they used the word murder, even though what he did is in no way considered to be murder. He did kill him, yes, but the most that he could have been accused of is manslaughter. Question. Non-whites skip this question. How has white privilege affected your life? It seems odd that they would add a question like this. It assumes that white people are greatly affected by white privilege, even though, at least where I live, all races are treated the same. Question. Was Officer George Zimmerman justified in the murder of teen Trayvon Martin? Okay, the murder thing again. I'll let that slide, but Officer George Zimmerman. He wasn't a cop. Jeez, do your research, kids. Now, I'm not racist, but I feel like the survey was terrible, with blatant bias and constant mistakes. It wasn't a proper survey. Story 25. I send people to them all the time in my work. I work for a corporate real estate firm. There's a ton of information in local libraries about the history of a location that's not online. Things like what the site used to be before the current owners owned it. We found several sites that were old gas stations, dry cleaners, and other businesses that have tipped us off that there may be contaminated soil. That can all cost millions to clean up, and once you buy the property, you own the liabilities as well. There was one particular case where an old thermometer factory had been demolished and a daycare was built there years later. Mercury vapors hover around the floors where babies crawled. Children got mercury poisoning, which can be deadly and have lifelong effects. If the real estate firm simply had gone to the local library, they could have accessed historical records of the site and avoided purchasing the entire property. Almost none of that information is online. TLDR, you need to know how to use the library. Having fun isn't hard when you've got a library card. Story 26. The dumbest I ever had was dumb for a bit of a different reason. I was in the GT, Gifted and Talented, program at my schools, and for whatever reason, the projects that we did in some classes were pretty much just busy work with no real academic benefit. Specifically, in my 5th grade class, we had to make a collage of information about our family's history, which was stupid enough on its own. What made this specific project the dumbest I ever had was the fact that about half my class and I had to do it twice, and almost a third time because my teacher lost it both times we turned it in. Luckily, from what I remember, she ended up giving us all A's on it instead of having us redo it again. It was either that or the time that my economics teacher in my senior year of high school had us do projects on entrepreneurs and not only let me do mine on Gerald Butler because she liked him, but also gave me an A because she was old and rich and honestly just didn't care. Got a few decent stories because of her being lazy. Story 27. It was a tradition for kids in my school during the summer between the 5th and 6th grade to make a bug collection of 40 different bugs. We had to catch and kill them while keeping them completely intact. We then had to label each of the bugs by their scientific and regular names, pin them all into a fancy schmancy case, and turn them all in at the beginning of the year with a report on one of the types of bugs. The bug cases were then all displayed in the lunchroom for the first 2 months of school. We had gotten a new 6th grade teacher when I did it, and she was terrified of all bugs, so she just gave everyone an automatic A. However, when my older brother did it, my parents didn't have enough money or time to get a nice bug bag, so he almost failed the project because my teacher didn't like his little box. Furthermore, because they were such a tiny class, this project caused all sorts of display of hierarchy, such as, "She has the most money and therefore the best display, so she's a better person." Another tradition at our school was for the 4th graders to have to fast for 48 hours for our Bible class. Like, our parents had to sign that we did it at home as well, and we would get an F if we didn't do it. I was underweight and sickly already, so my parents just made me take the F. There were a few kids that made it the whole way, but all ended up either puking or passing out just before the end of the 48 hours, so I felt like my school shouldn't have allowed this as an assignment.